Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Well, it is Thursday, so it's time for another market update to see how the freight market has changed week over week. As always, we're going to look at a general overview of the market, followed by a deep dive into spot market conditions for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening, whether something is changing for the better, at least a little bit, or if it's still going downhill. And then at the end of the video, I am going to tell you what my experience as a flatbed carrier has been last week. Ready? Let's go. All right, so all the charts are going to be attached right here while I look at them on my screen. So first of all, we're going to start with the general overview of the general market. General volume week over week has decreased by almost 1% for all equipment types. This is not the spot market. This is the market in general. Rejection rates on the general market have also decreased week over week by about 5.23%. Now, on the spot market, something different is going on. Spot market volumes for all equipment types have gone up 8.7%, and spot rates have gone up on average by 5 cents per mile. Okay, now let's move on to diesel prices, and we're going to start with the diesel map. The darker an area is, the more expensive diesel is there. I believe California is actually over $5 per gallon at this point. But as you can see, the West Coast and the Northeast are the places where you really do not want to refuel if you can avoid it. Texas and Oklahoma are still the cheapest states in terms of diesel prices, with less than $3.20 per gallon. Now, someone did say that they found a very cheap price in a more or less expensive state. That's going to happen. We're just taking averages here according to AAA. Now, if we take a look at diesel prices more closely on a national average, unfortunately, as of right now, they're on average $3.61 per gallon, which is an increase by almost 2 cents, actually 1.5 cents per gallon week over week, but it's still a decrease month over month and year over year. All right, finally, last but not least, let's take a look at what's happening with the capacity or the number of authorities in the general market. And unfortunately, as you can see, the white line, this is 0. And for the past 1, 2, 3 weeks, they have been increasing. As of last week, the net change in carrier population has seen an increase of 203 carriers. All right, now let's go on to specifics, starting with dry vans and the spot market. So good news here, week over week, they have seen an increase in terms of rates by about 3 cents per mile on average. Year over year, however, rates are about 1% lower than this time last year for dry vans on the spot market. Volumes week over week also saw an increase of 7%, but are 2% lower than this time last year. And currently, dry vans are seeing an average of $1.84 per mile. All right, now let's take a look at the spot market in terms of loads. Where are the loads for dry vans? The darker an area is, the more loads come out of that area. Texas has over 2,000 loads for dry vans in the whole state, of course. And then you can see that Georgia is the second state that has more volume. And then it's mostly the Midwest. The Plain states and the Northeast, as well as West Virginia, do not have much freight for dry vans. All right, what about capacity? Again, the darker an area, the more trucks there are in the spot market in that area. And again, I mean, for all equipments, trucks do tend to follow where the loads are at. But let's take a look at a new map that I made, which you will see right here. This is a load map by area. So the darker it is, the more loads there are. So the South has the most loads, followed by the Midwest, followed by the Plain states, then the Northeast, we'll call it, and the West Coast. The reason I'm showing you this map is because when I said last week that you should be following where the loads are at, it's because it does give you a little bit more leeway. If you're patient enough, if you're able not to panic book, you will be able to negotiate in those areas. So as you can see, Midwest and some of the South. Of course, Florida is also there. Florida is not a great place to be for dry vans, but the Midwest and some of the South is where the loads are at for those dry vans. All right, now let's take a look at the load to truck ratio for those dry vans. I have simplified the map because it was too colorful before. Anything red, that's burgundy red, is over capacity. There's less than a load per truck on average in that state, which is pretty much the West Coast, the Plain States, and the Northeast, as well as Florida. Anything orange, that is like Texas, Louisiana, the Midwest and South, as you can see, as well as Idaho, Wyoming, Arizona, that's more or less equilibrium, about 1 to 1.5 loads per truck, but you have to be careful because this is based on load board data, which means that again, brokers might be posting the same load more than once, or carriers might not be posting their trucks. And then Indiana and South Carolina is under capacity, or slight under capacity, I would say. It's between 1.5 to 2.5 loads per truck. The hardest thing to do right now is to stick to a good market area. You might find a normal place, but staying there is really difficult. So look at places where there is maybe equilibrium, maybe slight under capacity, but they're all bunched together. So you have a lot of choice. I hope that makes sense. So I would say for dry vans, the Midwest and some of the South is still a better place to be. All right, let's go on to reefers, which also saw an increase on the spot market. Rates went up by about 2 cents per mile week over week, and reefers are currently seeing on average $2.10 per mile. Year over year, however, rates are down 4% on the spot market for reefers. Volumes week over week went up 4.3%, but year over year, they're 8% down. All right, in terms of loads, so reefers are, notoriously, reefers don't see as much freight on the load boards as, let's say, dry vans or flatbeds, but still. Texas has between 1,000 to 1,999 loads for reefers, which means that this is the place where there are the most loads for this equipment type. California, Georgia, Illinois, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, they have between 300 to 500 loads, I would say. Now, where there are not a lot of loads for reefers is the Plain States like Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. But again, this surprises me every single time. Washington and Oregon, no reefer loads there. But what about capacity? Well, capacity, yeah, reefers tend to stick to Texas. They also end up in Florida very often where there are not a lot of loads, but this is because the rates usually pay better to Florida. And Illinois, Pennsylvania, California. These are the places that reefers do tend to stick to. Now, let me show you that volume map by area. So as you can see, most of the loads are in the Midwest: Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Michigan, etc. On the number 2 place is the South. So it kind of flipped from dry vans. Dry vans see more loads in the South, and then the Midwest, reefers are the opposite. So again, like I say, when it comes to finding a market area to stick to, the best bet is to stick to market areas where there are more loads. It gives you more choices. It gives you more ability to wait for a better load. But let's take a look at the load to truck ratio. Yeah, it's a little bit different from dry vans. You can see that overcapacity, the burgundy red, is all over the place. And there is not a single market area. It really is all over the place. Equilibrium, same thing. Oregon, Arizona, Georgia, New Jersey, it's everywhere. Slight undercapacity is the light orange or peach colored states like Texas, Wisconsin, West Virginia. And there are places with undercapacity, which has over 2.5 loads per truck, and that's Idaho and South Dakota. But again, remember the volumes, market areas. I recommend sticking to the areas where there is predominantly more volume because it gives you more choice, more flexibility. Okay, last but not least, we have our flatbeds, which also saw an increase on the spot market by 5 cents per mile, putting them at an average of $2.50 per mile right now on the spot market. But year over year, rates are down 5%. Now, volumes are doing something crazy, 9.7% up week over week for flatbeds on the spot market and 33% higher than this time last year. Okay, let's take a look at the flatbed loads. Again, the darker an area, the more loads come out of there. It's the same every single time. It's the South, the Midwest, and some of the East Coast, as well as California. And if we take a look at the capacity map, the capacity does tend to follow where the loads are. Now let's take a look at the volume map. It's very, very similar to what dry vans see. There are more loads in the South, followed by the Midwest, and then the Plain States, the Northeast, and the West Coast. Now, if you're wondering why is it that the Plain States for reefers, dry vans, and flatbeds showed that they're on third place, how is it possible that Plain States like Colorado and Montana have more loads than, for example, the West Coast? It's very simple. It's getting skewed by Texas. Texas has predominantly the most loads on the spot market for every equipment type. So that's where it comes from. But let's take a look at the load to truck ratio. So again, anything red is over capacity, less than a load per truck, which is all of the Plain States, some of the West Coast like Arizona, Utah, Idaho, some of the East Coast, and some of the Midwest as well. Now equilibrium, which is the orange, bright orange, the West Coast, some states in the Midwest like Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, this is equilibrium. Slight undercapacity exists where there are 1.5 to 2.5 loads per truck in Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Maine. And then there's undercapacity over 2.5 loads per truck, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama. It's pretty much the same all the time for flatbeds. Okay, now in terms of data versus experience, what I have experienced over the past, I would say 2 weeks, is a market that's easier to manage. As a flatbed carrier, then again, we have been keeping to better areas. Plus, something that I have noticed is that there is a demand from brokers. Brokers are calling constantly. The moment you post your truck, they start calling, and that's how I gauge the market. Something that I am confused about is the fact that capacity is continuing to come into the market. This is the third week in a row where the net change in carrier population is positive. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you guys think? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week and weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.